We are 6 months into the year, and in these months, there have been over 250 mass shootings in America already. The kids who get excited for ice creams and sports breaks, they also fall prey to America's gun terror. More than 2,500 children, teenagers, have been shot by America's gun terrorists. In response to the recent deadly and unjustified gun shooting, the United States House has passed a wide-ranging gun control bill. What does this entail? Raising the minimum age for purchasing certain firearms from 18 to 21. It also toughens prohibitions on untraceable guns. The legislation passed by a vote of 223 to 204. The push comes after a House committee heard emotional testimonies from recent shooting victims and family members. We got a chilling account from the recent mass shooting in a Texas school when the 18-year-old gunman opened fire. Mia Carrillo played dead by smearing herself with a murdered friend's blood. Mia is just 11 years old. Needless to say, she is still grappling with nightmares and the trauma of the incident. She was asked a few questions in a pre-recorded testimony. Listen in.
When I went to the backpacks, he shot my friend that was next to me, and I thought he was going to come back to the room, so I grabbed the blood and put it all over me. And
what did you do then when you put the blood on yourself?
Just stay quiet, and then I got my teacher's phone and called 911.
And what did you tell 911?
I told her that we need help and to send the police in our classroom.
This is not the first time the United States Congress has reacted to a mass shooting by proposing legislation. The Protecting Our Kids Act, though passed in the lower house, does not have optimistic chances of being passed in the Senate. And it's not surprising. Here's a look at decades worth of failed efforts in Congress to address gun violence after mass shootings. Starting with the worst mass shooting in a school in America's history. 26 people were killed, including 20 children, in Sandy Hook Elementary School. President Obama called for action and a bill was proposed to increase background checks on gun buyers. It failed to get the votes in the Senate. In 2015, 14 people were killed in San Bernardino. This time, both Democrats and Republicans proposed some gun control measures. All of them failed to get the votes needed to be passed in Congress. In 2016, 49 people died in a nightclub in Orlando. This time, 4 proposals were made, all of them similar to the ones made before, extending background checks, not allowing people on terrorist watch lists to buy guns. But all of them failed to pass in Senate. There was only one time that Congress acted successfully. Also in 2017, 26 people were killed in church in Sutherland Springs. Congress proposed and passed the Fix NICS Act. It made modest improvements on background checks and was backed by the NRA. President Trump signed into law in 2018. So does this Protect Our Kids have any chance of being signed into law? History would say the chances are slim. A poll conducted in the aftermath of the Texas shooting by CBS and YouGov showed that nearly half of Republican voters think the country has to just live with mass shootings. And for more on this, we're now being joined by Mr. Spencer Crishley. Mr. Crishley has worked with former US President Barack Obama and also has experience in gun violence reduction. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Crishley.
My pleasure.
Now, if we talk about other countries that have similar rate of gun ownership in comparison to the United States, we don't necessarily see the same number of violent crimes, say like in countries like Finland. So what do you think drives gun violence? Easy access, we know, is one reason. Do you think there are other factors involved?
It's hard to know for certain because one of the things the gun lobby has been preventing is the conducting of research into gun violence because they really don't want people to know for sure. They exist really to serve the interests of gun sellers, not gun owners, and their whole focus is maximizing profits no matter the expense, unfortunately. But based on the data that we do have, the strongest correlation we see is easy availability of guns and the high level of gun violence. We see that across the 50 states in the United States, where it's harder to get a gun, you have lower gun violence, where it's easier, you have higher gun violence. And although there are other countries that have similar rates of gun ownership, I don't think anybody quite matches us. We have far more guns than people in this country. Those comparisons are not apples to apples, as it were. In Switzerland, for example, it's very common to own a gun, but the level of training is much higher, and it's not necessarily as easy to get hold of ammunition. In the United States, we have these extreme gun radicals who don't want to have any even training requirements to own assault weapons, and I think that makes us exceptional in the worst way in this case.
Right. Now, it is said that with technological advances, gun control, that may become even harder. What is your take on the same?
Yes, of course, with these ghost guns, and these kits to make guns yourself, it'll presumably get that much more difficult. This debate actually is not really a debate anymore in this country, unfortunately. Like so much else in our politics, it's almost entirely symbolic, especially on the right. The United States, in my view, and I go into this in detail in my book, is kind of suffering from a split consciousness where half the country tends to be trapped in its head, and that would be liberals, the left, the Democrats on my side of the fence. And the right is increasingly living in a world of mysticism and symbolism and is separated from rational thought, and a complete human being needs both. And so, unfortunately, the gun issue, like so many other issues in the United States, is largely symbolic. And, my side can quote facts and figures about how to reduce gun violence all day long. But on the right, it's much more a question of symbolism about freedom and personal safety and this sort of thing, much of which doesn't actually make any sense, but that's not really the point.
Right. Now, when we speak of gun control, do you think increasing the minimum age for purchasing weapons, that is enough? Is it perhaps time to build a more efficient background check system and infrastructure that is more deliberate and thorough?
Yes, it clearly is. And, this is where I say that none of this is rational. The right-wing position on this, the radical pro-gun position, and I want to separate that from the position of responsible gun owners, because, like it or not, the United States does have a Second Amendment that does have a long tradition behind it of protecting gun rights, but always in conjunction with responsibility. However, the radical pro-gun people want no limitations whatsoever, which is irrational. I mean, you have a right in this country to move around and to own a car, but you don't have a right to drive a tank down the street or to drive an enormous truck without being licensed to drive that truck. And yet, for some reason, with guns, one of the most dangerous products you could possibly buy, the radical pro-gun people don't want the slightest restriction, even, preventing an 18-year-old, a mentally disturbed 18-year-old, from buying an AR-15.
Right. Mr. Spencer Crishley, thank you so much for joining us with your insights on the same. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.